the most enormous ancient structure built of the largest blocks on Earth. Here in Lebanon, there are the biggest stones ever used by man in construction. The so-called trilitons are 19 meters long, about 5 meters wide and 4 meters high. The weight of each stone is about 800 tons, and they are raised to a height of 7 meters. Trilitons are placed on a number of blocks that are only 1.5 times smaller, but are no less striking. And now the most interesting thing. In the quarry there are world record holders in size. The Northern Stone, Southern Stone, and 2 others underneath it. One of them is called the Forgotten Stone and is the largest processed stone in the world, its weight coming in at 1,670 tons. The length is 19.6 meters, width 6 meters, and height 5.5 meters. All these stones are still connected to the rock with their bottom sides. The blocks were probably meant to fill the triliton-filled podium, because there's still space for 10 of them, and the largest stone was intended for a layer on the trilitons. Then, the canonical Roman podium, though unprecedented in size, would have come out. In this case, on the top layer it was necessary to put 14 blocks of 1,500 tons of weight. By the way, there is a hypothesis that the Romans observed here the so-called Herodian style of masonry by ancient builders and then began to use it everywhere. The Bacchus temple is the main attraction of Baalbek, but in fact it stands apart from the main structure, and the main temple here was the temple of Jupiter. If it wasn't ruined, then its grandeur would easily eclipse the temple of Bacchus. Among the ruins of Jupiter's temple, we see the largest survived ancient columns in the world, 19 meters high. It's the height of a 5-story house. If the temple had survived to this day, it would have made the Parthenon in Athens look like a tiny cottage. We know for sure that the columns were brought from Egypt because they were made of zionite, which is only there. And these giants were elevated to a 7-meter platform of huge blocks, which stands on another platform with a huge tunnel inside. The writer and traveller Mark Twain wrote in his memoirs that a train could safely pass in these tunnels, and indeed now there is a museum here, but of all its exhibits the most impressive is the tunnel itself. But this is not all. The stairs in the opposite part of the complex are the same trilitons in the form of stairs, so there are 7 more of these blocks here. Nowhere in the world are there any analogues of such a huge staircase, carved from a solid piece of stone. So, who did build this giant complex? Probably the craziest theory I've ever found was that Baalbek was built in the 19th century. Why? I don't really understand. Maybe so we can make these kinds of videos. There were also suggestions that the force of gravity used to be different, and even that the temple was built with the power of thought. There is also a bit less fantastic, but no less beautiful version about giants. Here we have the ancient people of the Adites, and the legend of the ruler Nimrod, who restored Baalbek after the flood with the help of the Titans. By the way, Nimrod is credited with the construction of the notorious Babylonian Tower. However, there is no scientific evidence to support the theory about giants. The same processing marks on the stones indicate that the stones were handled by people of our height with pick and chisel of normal size. Some claim that the blocks are made of concrete, which is simply contrary to the proven facts. These blocks are of solid limestone. Even if they were made of concrete, it would be done right on site, not in the quarry. The next version is much more interesting because here we're dealing with certain facts and attempts to find evidence as well as the presence of experts to support it. According to this version, Baalbek was built by an ancient civilization that had the technology to carve, move, and lay such stones with relative ease. And in here lies its main weakness. We have a giant construction, but no tools, no infrastructure for its creation, and no factories have been found. And this fact drives all open-minded alternative history supporters into a narrow conclusion where a highly advanced civilization from another planet, after finishing their work, packed up and took all of their tools with them. Let's say they flew back to Orion. Only then does it all make sense. Now, let's take a look at the official historical version. The city of Baalbek was first mentioned by the Amarna letters dating back to the 14th century BC. In ancient times, there was a Phoenician temple dedicated to the god Baal. We do not know how it looked. By the way, since ancient times, in these lands, Baal was one of the main gods and was worshipped and recognized. With the change of the epoch and the modification of religions, this god was demonized, and now you can easily find his name in the list of demonic beings. It all seems like changing one political regime for another. Historians say that the process of construction has repeatedly stopped and has taken more than 2 centuries. All the researchers can agree on is one thing: the temple, whose ruins we see, has never been completed. Over the years, the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Arabs, Greeks, and Romans have lived here. In the Middle Ages, Baalbek was often used as a fortification, where battles were often fought. For many years, it was subjected to the iconoclasm by Christians and Muslims. It is known that at the end of the 1st century BC, there was a province of the Roman Empire, Judea, whose ruler was Herod the Great, who went down in history not only as a cruel king, but also a great builder. He is credited with the construction of the main buildings. There is also written confirmation that Herod was actively funding construction projects in the Roman territories in order to consolidate his power. Experts are also convinced that Herod also carried out the reconstruction of the Second Jerusalem temple. Jerusalem and Baalbek have the same block sizes, average row heights, and the Herodian style of masonry, with layers of small blocks alternating with layers of large blocks. The resemblance is undeniable. It is believed that the inner platform was built at the end of the 1st century BC, the second one in the end of the 1st century AD. The Temple of Bacchus was built in the 2nd century, and the Temple of Venus was built even later and was preserved the worst. The drawing of the pediment of the Jupiter temple seems really interesting. It was found on the top of one of these trilitons. The drawing covers the entire top of the block and is partially hidden under the blocks laid on top of it. It looks like the builders executed so close to the construction to check if they were building it right. So, the blocks over the trilitons were set at the same time as the Temple of Jupiter, and on top of the upper drum of one of the columns of Jupiter's temple is found an inscription in Greek, indicating the year, which according to our chronicles is considered 60 AD. If this inscription is accurate, it suggests a construction date. But there are still many questions with no answers. For example, how did the builders know that the rock goes to a sufficient depth, and that they would be able to extract such a solid block 5.5 meters high? If you know the answer to these questions, write in the comments. Why Baalbek, unlike most ancient buildings, including Roman ones, does not have a clear orientation on the sides of this world? How and why such perfect joints were made? Even supporters of the official version find it difficult to understand how such huge blocks were placed on each other, tossed and turned to fit the gaps and eliminate irregularities between 2 blocks. What are these circular traces that look like disc cutter marks? Pay attention to this one-piece block. It means that this corridor was made sloping after its creation. How and why? The complex is riddled through and through with mysterious traces of destruction. A huge part of the collapsed wall, and clearly opposite it, the exact same damage in another wall, which was carelessly restored. And then there's this block, that's either cracked or it's been punctured by something, so that they had to align the hole and put it in small blocks. Of course, it could be the effects of an earthquake, which repeatedly damaged the complex. Or maybe they're traces of something much more interesting. Have you seen what the Bacchus temple looked like a century ago? For some reason, few people pay attention to these photos, but they are quite interesting. By the way, there are people who are convinced that inside this column is a metal rod that was hidden from us by covering it with a solution. What do you think? In fact, to cut such a megalith by hand, although it would be very time consuming and very inconvenient, would still be quite possible. Given that limestone is far from the hardest rock, it is believed that Roman subjects cut down megaliths manually and used winches and large numbers of people to transport them. blocks were dragged along a special 800 meters long embankment from the quarry to the complex. I want to remind you that the quarry is only 1 degree lower than the temple, which at least eliminates the need to drag up. History has shown examples of transporting very large stones at different times. The obelisk of Thutmose III, weighing 280 tons, had been moved from Karnak to Constantinople in the 4th century AD. The obelisk of Mussolini, weighing 300 tons, was dragged 11 kilometers to the harbour on wooden rollers. The Thunderstone, weighing 1,500 tons in 1769, was transferred 8 kilometers and then on ship transported to St. Petersburg. However, in the case of the Thunderstone, it was a national event, well covered in the press. During the transportation, issues arose, which almost stopped the whole process. And this is just one stone, and this is 1769. We're talking at least 1,700 years before that, and dozens of stones. Jean-Pierre Adam calculated that it would take 120 people and 6 winches, which were available to the Romans at the time, to move 800 tons of stone to the site of construction on wooden rollers by a good Roman road. But the question remains, will the logs hold such weight? Why did they build such huge megalithic buildings in Baalbek and Jerusalem, but not in Rome? Perhaps because there are large deposits of good, fairly durable limestone without cracks and irregularities. So they didn't have to drag the stones out of nowhere and ship them out to sea, etc. Because the quarry is 800 meters from Baalbek. The same goes for Jerusalem. And in Rome, the main building material was travertine and tuff, which is simply not suitable for megalithic constructions. Let's sum up. Huge 1,000-ton blocks were cut down from the quarry in large numbers. They were moved 800 meters to the complex, and there, with immense accuracy and precision, were stacked on each other and processed. There are also several incredible temples with huge columns. So far, no experiments have been carried out with similar 800-ton blocks in similar conditions, so that it is possible to say with certainty that this was exactly done by the Romans or other people of those times. Our knowledge of Roman technology, of the practices of moving huge stones in other areas, and theoretical calculations of researchers make it possible to say that this was possible to do without super technology. But, given the scale, it would require a lot of manpower, a lot of willpower, and an incredible amount of time and effort. Living in modern cities, it is hard to imagine how people could have put such an unreal amount of effort in the construction. Perhaps they were slaves and they were building this complex for some king. But it is not worth completely dismissing the theory that part of the complex was built much earlier by some unknown civilization, information of which has reached us only in the form of legends. Personally, I believe that the benefits of an alternative version are that its adherents raise uncomfortable questions and awaken a new interest in ancient buildings and a deeper study of its origins. Write in the comments which version you are committed to. Maybe you have an opinion which was not mentioned in this video. Thank you all for watching, subscribe, hit the bell, and see you soon on the Ancient Builders channel.